Happy Monday. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Ebony Janice. I go by Ebony Janice, which means that you should call me Ebony Janice. And this is Theology in Plain Clothes. Today I'm talking about womanism, just the very brief definition of it, because I realized that a lot of people know what feminism is and have never either heard of womanism or don't actually have a real working definition of womanism. And also even a lot of people still conflate it with black feminism. And I want to give a very quick distinction between the difference. So, womanism is language that Alice Walker introduced several years ago. She actually introduced it before In Search of Our Mother's Garden, but she introduced the definition of womanism in her book In Search of Our Mother's Garden. And she has this 4-part definition. It's like womanish, a young girl being considered too willful, too grown, knowing too much. There's another part of the definition that's like loves spirit, loves the moon, loves roundness, loves music, loves dance. There's another part of the definition that's like that gives this kind of example. A daughter says to the mother, "Mom, I'm going to Canada and I'm taking you and several other slaves with me." And the mother responds, "You wouldn't be the first time." And the 4th part of the definition is womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender. And so in a way, Alice Walker is ultimately saying that womanism is black women's deeper shade of purple. It is black women's deeper feminist work. Part of the reason why womanism then is the distinction between womanism and black feminism in particular is the spiritual portion of it. Alice Walker has introduced this definition through prose, and black feminists really at the introduction of black feminism or black feminists specifically naming that they were not like whatever that feminism is that was white feminism was not the same thing. So calling themselves black feminist in particular. And so the spiritual religious aspect of it feels essential. The introduction of the language coming through prose is essential and necessary to this conversation. And also the way that she's fleshed out these 4 parts of definition, she really believes that womanism is the deeper feminist work, that we are talking about something that is more than just about gender equality, particularly because there's also a part of the definition that says loves women sometimes sexually, sometimes non-sexually, loves men sometimes sexually, sometimes non-sexually, not a separatist except periodically for times of health. So the way that she's fleshing this out, there is some intersectionality already built into it. It doesn't really need to go several waves before that happens, even though it does take a few waves before we flesh out trans identity. There are probably a few ways before we really start talking inside of womanism about gender nonconforming and like what is the relationship there. And so that is womanism. That is the definition of womanism, and that is a very brief kind of distinction between womanism and feminism. I came to womanism from a theological perspective because after Black liberation liberation theology had become like really enfleshed, and Dr. James Cone was like teaching this, and he's thinking about, you know, Black people's relationship with Christ and Black people's relationship with God and Black people's relationship with the cross, and you know, this conversation about the cross and the lynching tree, that there were Black women theologians who were inside of that learning and inside of that infleshing, who were also thinking, but there must be something very specific for Black women. God could not have forgotten Black women's very specific location. And so they loved the language of womanism. They took on womanism, even though Alice Walker wasn't specifically talking about a particular religion. Certainly can, you know, just guess that Alice Walker was not thinking about Christianity explicitly or specifically. And so Black feminist or Black womanist theologians named themselves womanists. I call myself a womanist because I say that womanism saved me. I was in my theological shift, and even though my theological shift did lead me away from Christianity, it never separated me from Jesus Christ. I always say that Jesus was my way to God, and then in order for me to actualize in the fullness of the destiny that my Ori chose, or the destiny that I chose in the eternal, that I could not remain on the Christian path, that it brought me to Ifa, which is why it is a very personal thing to me, and I'm never trying to tell other people what they do with their walk, because your walk is your walk and my walk is my walk. All that to say that is womanism. That is like the difference, the distinction between womanism and feminism is that womanism was always thinking about spirit. It was always thinking about roundness. It was always thinking about the moon. It was always thinking from this very poetic kind of prose perspective. And there's something somatic about that. And there's something very spiritual and religious about that just in the inception of it. And so that distinction, the other reason why a lot of people, those of us that call ourselves womanists versus calling ourselves Black feminists, which isn't to separate ourselves from the work of what Black feminists are doing, because we cite it and pull from it and source from it on an ongoing basis, but it is ultimately to say, for me, I don't call myself a black feminist or a feminist because I want it to be crystal clear that when I talk about my womanism or when I talk about the work that I'm doing towards, not just towards gender equality, because it isn't even that necessarily, it is towards wholeness and fullness, and again, that roundness, and whatever that means, that I'm not talking about whatever white women are talking about when they talk about feminism at all. We are just not talking about the same thing. And so to be in that naming just feels like more effort to try to explain it than to just name myself a womanist. Has this been helpful? Tell me in the comment section if you heard of womanism before this video, and what is your introduction to womanism? What is your introduction to womanist ethic? What is your introduction to womanist theory? And while I'm here, have you read my book, All the Black Girls Are Activists, A Fourth Wave Womanist Pursuit of Dreams as Radical Resistance, where I actually introduced the language for a fourth wave of womanism? Have you read my book?